far as time goes, we're down to 9 minutes, so I'm going to cover the books of the Bible. Now, this diagram is based on something I read years ago, and I modified it because I only saw it in the New Testament. So now we're going to talk about the Old Testament for a minute here. The Law of Moses at the bottom of the page. So here's the idea on the arch. The bottom part is the foundation. The left and right side are, like the walls holding it up, and then the arch connects everything. So the bottom and the top are extremely significant in their own way, and then the two walls are significant in their own way. At the bottom, you've got the Law of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And if you see the little legend, the box at the bottom, I wrote that these first 5 books set the scene for Israel. Often when you read in the Bible God addressing Israel, he says, I'm the Lord your God, which brought your people out of Egypt. The idea that they were brought out of Egypt ripples through the entire Bible in a foundational way. Then, and so the Law of Moses, you're going to have a lot of stories, you're going to have a lot of genealogies, you're going to have a lot of rules, because since there's no separation of church and state back then, this isn't just their story, this isn't just their cultural identity in terms of narrative, it's their cultural identity in terms of rules. This is how you treat a stranger. This is how you treat a foreigner. This is how you deal with property. You've heard eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Well, in the Old Testament, that was a very big deal because up until then, it worked like this. You hurt my kid, I'm going to wipe out your entire family. That's how they thought. So instead, you hurt my kid, the most I can do is hurt yours. Now, to us, in the New Testament, we're given a different parallel. But it's important to understand that in its time, it was revolutionary as a concept. Because, again, think The Godfather, think Goodfellas, think Afghanistan, think the Old West. You couldn't enforce law because you often didn't have a standing army, you often didn't have a police force, you often didn't have an organized government. So rules were everything, and how you could consistently enforce them was very important. So when the Law of Moses introduced the eye for eye, tooth for tooth, they were saying proportionate response. That's a concept in justice that we use to this day, proportional response. Let the punishment fit the crime. If somebody shoplifts, you don't shoot them in the head. So, to this day, that's why they talk about Judeo-Christian values. Judeo-Christian values come from the bottom of this diagram. So, the historical books, now that we've seen a timeline, historical books make a bit of sense. Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. The historical books I've already been kind of explaining, talking about Old Testament culture. I've already been explaining it and talking about Old Testament timeline. So I'm not going to take a lot of time, except to tell you that the chronological Bible embeds the text. And so when you have the prophets later on talking, when you have Psalms and you have Proverbs, when you have the different prophets addressing specific situations, something like a narrated Bible, which introduces what you're going to read. It's in 365 readings, and it's arranged chronologically so that, say, Chronicles and Kings, which give a similar history from two different points of view, they merge those together. You've got King David's story in Samuel merged with the Psalms that he wrote at specific and key times in his life. I think this is really useful once you have a cheat sheet like this. I intentionally duplexed the timeline with the arch, so that if you did get a chronological Bible, you could fold that in half and slap it in there, and when you're reading the Old Testament, you will be much less lost. The Costco analogy, you are here. When you have some idea where you want to go, this becomes easier. When I talk about the New Testament, I'll give a few guidelines on reading. But for now, I'll just say that Proverbs continues to be a very useful book. If you look at the top of the chart, the poetic books, well, first let me explain. The 12 books that are the historical books, they establish Israel's story. Well, the top of the arch, the poetic books, these middle 5 books discuss life's big questions. And since I do have 5 minutes, I'm going to take 2 or 3 of them to talk about the top of the arch because it's extremely useful to us today. Has anyone ever asked himself, why is it so easy to buy a New Testament with Psalms and Proverbs included? It's because Psalms and Proverbs, maybe more than all the other books as far as daily life goes, they're the aisle near the front of the store where the handiest items are. Psalms take the time to express pretty much any emotion known to man, including feeling like God's got it in for you or life isn't fair. Whereas the Proverbs were filled with ideas about, remember the previous diagram, things that were hard to find, things that were more common to find. It was hard to find God-centered thinking. Proverbs has a lot of God-centered thinking in terms of daily, practical advice. Job is about suffering, and it helps us have a vocabulary for times when the world isn't making sense. When we are in pain, Job is a book that can help us find the words for what we're feeling. When we are feeling the range of human emotions, whether we're really happy or we're really sad, or we really feel like nothing is happening that we need to have happen, or whatever, Psalms are very useful. When we're looking on advice on how to live, to gain skill in living, the Proverbs are very helpful. For a very long time, Ecclesiastes was one of my favorite books. In Hebrews, it says that God has placed everything under Jesus' feet, but we do not yet see all things under Jesus' feet. The reason I have liked Ecclesiastes for so long is because it is about how the world looks from a purely human point of view. I am deeply grateful that God saw fit to include a book that involves how I feel day to day sometimes, when I feel depleted or when I feel low, when things aren't going right, when I'm depressed. That is a great book to help me find the vocabulary. Job is more for when you're really ticked off, and Ecclesiastes is more for when you're really frustrated and depressed. So I'm very grateful. And Song of Solomon, it's very interesting, desire and passion are godly. God created those feelings in us, and he created a context for it. It's such a powerful part of our life. It's like a knife. A knife is good for cutting steak. It does not belong in your arm. So when you read about the prophets going on and on about the misuse of sex, it has more to do with how powerful sex is than it does with, that it's bad or something. And the Song of Solomon is there to remind us. So finally, the prophetic books, you've got 5 major prophets, and then you've got 12 minor prophets. And try to understand that for the most part, prophets are not attempting to tell a story narratively. They're more sermons. So at various times in Israel's history, God did the best he could to get people back on track. And so if the top of the arch, the poetic books, discuss life's big questions, then the last 17 books help us to set things right. And I do want to show you one thing. The bottom of the arch, 5 books. Left side, 12. Top side, 5. Right side is 17, but actually it's 5 big ones and then 12 small ones. So 5, 12, 5, 5, 12. Kind of breaks it down for you a little bit. The Law of Moses and the historical books are literature. The top of the arch is poetry, and the right of the arch is sermons. So when you're shopping at Costco, we are at the roadmap stage. You are here. And let me explain a moment here what the center diagram is. So you see the arrow on the right next to all the prophets? And I wrote prophet. At the bottom, the Law of Moses, which among other things goes on for page after page after page. The proper way to sacrifice the animal, the proper robes to wear, something called an ephod, the way to build a tabernacle, and so on. Very concerned with the priesthood, the system of worship in Israel. And then on the left side, most of these books are about the kings of Israel. So we have king. Well, in the middle, I've put Messiah in caps with an exclamation mark, but I've put parentheses on it to show you that Christ is even present in the Old Testament. As the fulfillment, he is prophet, priest, and king. This is a basic element of Christian doctrine that, to the best of my knowledge, all the major branches agree on. Jesus is intertwined in all of these stories. I've heard him referred to as the scarlet thread that intertwines Scripture. So the reason I put this at the center, prophet, priest, king, is because the arrow is near the books that are primarily concerned with that element. And then Christ is in the center. He's going to explode on the scene next week when we talk about the New Testament. Exactly 1 hour. Who wants to take 5 minutes for Q&A? Okay, we've got a vote. So anything you guys want to ask, now's the time. I'm done throwing the fire hose at you. It's a lot to take in. Now keep in mind, I don't expect you to have absorbed everything I just threw at you. That's why we're recording it, and that's why we have handouts.